What if the hands everyone called cursed were actually blessed? Colorado Territory, 1880. A town so small that everyone knew everyone's business, and no one ever forgot the day 15-year-old Lucy Mercer's hands were destroyed. "Devil's child," they whispered. "Cursed hands," they shouted. "Don't let her touch you. Bad luck follows wherever she goes." But what happens when the town's most feared outcast becomes its most unlikely hero? When the hands they called ruined perform an act so extraordinary that it shatters every prejudice, every cruel assumption. Those hands saved my daughter. Stay with me until the very end of this story, because what you're about to discover will challenge everything you think you know about judgment, redemption, and the price of being different in a world that demands conformity. Before we ride deeper into Lucy's powerful journey, I need you to take action right now. Hit that subscribe button and smash that notification bell. Why? Because here at the Black Rancher, we're uncovering the buried stories of the American frontier, stories of outcasts, heroes, and the courage it takes to stand against an entire town. These forgotten tales deserve to be told. If you believe that everyone, no matter how they look or what scars they carry, deserves dignity and justice, then share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Your support helps us preserve these powerful narratives. Subscribe now and let's ride together into the heart of this incredible story. Welcome to the Black Rancher. Colorado Territory, August 1880. The sun hung high over Silver Point, a small frontier town nestled in the shadow of the Rockies, where the summer heat turned the dirt streets into dust and the air into furnace breath. On the corner of Main Street, just outside Harlan's General Store, a crowd had gathered, not for celebration, but for cruelty. "Look at 'em! Devil's hands!" 15-year-old Lucy Mercer stood frozen in the center of the hostile circle, her scarred hands trembling at her sides. The burns that covered both hands, from fingertips to wrists, told the story of a tragedy 3 years old, but the town's memory was as fresh as yesterday. Her hands were a twisted landscape of red, shiny scar tissue and pale, tight skin that pulled uncomfortably with every movement. The fire that had claimed her hands had also claimed her mother's life, and in the eyes of Silver Point's residents, Lucy carried both the marks of tragedy and the stain of guilt. "My mama said you're cursed," shouted 10-year-old Bobby Fletcher, emboldened by the presence of adults who did nothing to stop him. "Said the fire was God's punishment." Lucy's jaw clenched. She'd heard it all before. The whispers in church, the mothers pulling their children away when she passed, the doors that closed before she could knock. But knowing it was coming never made it easier. "That's enough, boy." The voice cut through the crowd like a blade, deep, authoritative, and entirely unexpected. The crowd parted, revealing a tall black man astride a magnificent chestnut mare. He was somewhere in his mid-30s, with shoulders broad enough to carry the weight of the world, and eyes that had seen too much suffering to tolerate witnessing more. This was Nathaniel Cross, owner of the Double Creek Ranch, 500 acres of prime grazing land he'd purchased with money earned from years of back-breaking work as a freedman cowboy. He was one of only 3 black landowners in the county, and the only one who dared ride into Silver Point proper on a regular basis. "This ain't your concern, Cross," sneered Martin Fletcher, Bobby's father and the town's self-appointed moral authority. "We're just teaching the girl some lessons about her place." Nathaniel dismounted with the fluid grace of a man who'd spent more years in the saddle than on foot. He stood a full head taller than Martin Fletcher, and when he spoke, his voice carried the quiet authority of someone who'd fought for every inch of respect he'd earned. "Her place?" Nathaniel's eyes swept across the crowd. "And where exactly is that? In the center of a mob being terrorized by grown men who should know better." "She's a danger," insisted Mrs. Blackwood, the banker's wife, clutching her parasol like a weapon. "Those hands—" "Are just hands," Nathaniel interrupted firmly. "Scarred, yes, but hands nonetheless, same as mine." He held up his own hands, dark and weathered, bearing their own collection of scars from years of ranch work, rope burns, and the general violence of frontier life. Lucy looked up at this unexpected defender, her hazel eyes swimming with unshed tears. She'd never spoken to Nathaniel Cross before. He lived miles outside town and rarely involved himself in Silver Point's social affairs. Why would he risk his already tenuous standing in the community to defend her? The girl's mother died in that fire, Nathaniel continued, his voice lower now, but no less forceful. She lost everything that night. And instead of Christian charity, you folks have spent 3 years making sure she loses a little bit more of herself every single day. We know what we've seen, Martin Fletcher insisted, but his voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. That fire wasn't natural. And the girl walked out without a scratch on her face. Just those hands. If that ain't the devil's work... It's called pushing someone out of the way, Nathaniel said coldly. I heard the real story from Doc Morrison. Lucy's mother was trapped by fallen timber. Lucy tried to lift it. The burns came from her gripping burning wood to try to save her mother's life. There's nothing cursed about that. That's courage. That's love. That's the kind of sacrifice I'd be proud to claim if she were my daughter. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Some had the decency to look ashamed. Others, like Martin Fletcher, merely looked angry at being challenged. Lucy felt something crack open inside her chest, a tiny fracture in the wall she'd built around her heart over 3 years of relentless persecution. This stranger was defending her. More than that, he was telling her story, the true story, the one no one had ever bothered to ask about. Come on, girl, Nathaniel said, extending his hand to Lucy. I'll take you wherever you need to go. Lucy stared at his outstretched hand, scarred, strong, and offered without hesitation. Slowly, she reached out with her own damaged hand and placed it in his. The crowd watched in stunned silence as Nathaniel Cross helped Lucy Mercer onto his horse, swung up behind her, and rode slowly down Main Street without a backward glance. Behind them, the crowd dispersed, whispers spreading like wildfire. The black rancher had defended the cursed girl. It would be the talk of the town for weeks. But Nathaniel wasn't thinking about gossip. He was thinking about the way Lucy's hand had trembled in his, not from fear of him, but from 3 years of accumulated shame, finally meeting a moment of unexpected dignity. Where do you live? He asked quietly as they rode. Old Miller's boarding house, Lucy replied, her voice hoarse from disuse. She rarely spoke anymore. Words were weapons in Silver Point, and she'd learned to avoid giving people ammunition. You work there? Laundry, kitchen, whatever Mrs. Miller needs. I earn my keep. Nathaniel heard what she wasn't saying, that Mrs. Miller allowed her to stay more out of grim practicality than kindness, that Lucy's labor was probably worth more than the tiny room and meager meals she received in exchange. You're good with your hands? He asked. I mean, despite... I'm fast, Lucy said quickly, defensively. Faster than most people with perfect hands. I've learned to compensate. I can do anything they can do. I don't doubt it, Nathaniel said. And surprisingly, he didn't. There was something in the set of Lucy's shoulders, a resilience that hadn't been broken despite years of cruelty. They rode in silence for a few more minutes before Nathaniel spoke again. I have a daughter, Charlotte. She's 7 years old. Lucy wasn't sure why he was telling her this, so she remained quiet. Her mother, my wife, died 2 years ago, Nathaniel continued. Fever took her quick. Since then, it's just been Charlotte and me on the ranch. I've got 2 ranch hands who help with the livestock, but neither of them knows the first thing about raising a little girl. Understanding dawned slowly. You're offering me a job? If you're interested. Charlotte needs someone to look after her during the day while I'm working the ranch. Someone to teach her things her mama would have taught her. Cooking, sewing, reading. Someone patient and kind. I'm not kind, Lucy said automatically. I'm exactly what I need, Nathaniel finished firmly. Someone who knows what it's like to be judged unfairly. Someone who's had to be strong when the world tried to break her. That's the kind of person I want teaching my daughter how to navigate this hard world. Lucy felt tears pricking her eyes again, but this time they weren't tears of shame. Why are you doing this? You don't even know me. Nathaniel was quiet for a long moment before answering. Because I know what it's like to have doors slammed in your face for something you can't control. And because, when I looked at that crowd today, I saw the same ugly spirit that's been trying to crush folks like me my whole life. I won't stand by and watch it happen to someone else. Not if I can do something about it. They arrived at Mrs. Miller's boarding house, a weathered two-story structure that had seen better days. Lucy slid down from the horse, her scarred hands gripping the saddle horn for balance. "Think about my offer," Nathaniel said. "Double Creek Ranch, 5 miles northeast of town. You can start whenever you're ready. I'll pay you fair wages, same as I'd pay anyone else." "Mr. Cross," Lucy began, struggling to find words adequate to the moment. "Just Nathaniel," he corrected gently. "Nathaniel," Lucy repeated. "Thank you for today, for everything." He tipped his hat. "No thanks needed. Sometimes standing up is all we've got." As Nathaniel rode away, Lucy stood in the dust of the street, watching until horse and rider disappeared into the shimmering heat haze. For the first time in 3 years, she felt something she'd thought had died in the flames that scarred her hands. She felt hope. 1 week later, Lucy approached the Double Creek Ranch on foot just after dawn, carrying everything she owned in a single worn canvas bag. The walk from town had taken her nearly 2 hours, but she'd refused to ask for a ride. She needed to prove to Nathaniel, to herself, that she could do this on her own terms. The ranch house was modest but well-maintained, a 2-story structure with a wide front porch and a fresh coat of whitewash that gleamed in the early morning light. Behind it, corrals and outbuildings spread across the property in organized efficiency. Even to Lucy's untrained eye, it was clear that Nathaniel Cross ran a tight operation. Before she could knock, the front door burst open and a small tornado of energy exploded onto the porch. "You're here! You're here! Papa said you might come." 7-year-old Charlotte Cross was a whirlwind of copper-brown skin, bouncing braids and an infectious smile that lit up her entire face. She wore a simple calico dress that had been carefully mended in several places, and her bare feet were already dusty from morning adventures. "I'm Lucy," Lucy said carefully, still uncertain of her reception. "I know. Papa told me. He said you're going to teach me things and help around the house and be my friend." Charlotte's words tumbled out in an excited rush. "I've never had a friend before. Not a real one. Just Papa and the ranch hands, but they don't count because they're grown-ups and grown-ups are boring." Despite herself, Lucy felt a smile tugging at her lips. "Your Papa isn't boring." "Well, no," Charlotte conceded. "Papa's different. He tells the best stories. But he doesn't know how to braid hair right, and his biscuits are terrible, and he can't sew at all. Mama used to do all those things, but she's been gone for a really long time now." The casual mention of her mother's death, delivered with the matter-of-fact acceptance of a child who'd learned to live with loss, made Lucy's heart ache. "I miss Mama every day," Charlotte continued, her voice dropping to something more thoughtful. "But Papa says that's okay. He says the people we love stay with us even after they're gone, as long as we remember them." "That's true," Lucy said softly, thinking of her own mother, the woman who'd died trying to shield her from flames. Nathaniel emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. He looked surprised but pleased to see Lucy standing on his porch. "You came," he said simply. "I said I would think about it," Lucy replied. "I thought about it, and I'm here. If the offer still stands." "It does. Come on inside, Charlotte. Give Lucy a chance to breathe before you talk her ear off." The interior of the house was clean, but clearly lacked a woman's touch. Practical furniture occupied practical spaces. Everything was functional, nothing was decorative, but it was warm and welcoming in a way that had nothing to do with aesthetics and everything to do with the love that clearly existed between father and daughter. Nathaniel showed Lucy to a small room on the 2nd floor. "This was going to be a nursery," he explained. "My wife and we'd hoped to have more children, but after Charlotte, there were complications. And then the fever." He trailed off, old grief shadowing his features. "It's perfect," Lucy said, meaning it. The room had a window overlooking the eastern pasture, a simple bed and a small chest for her belongings. After 3 years in Mrs. Miller's cramped, dim attic space, it felt like a palace. "You'll take meals with us," Nathaniel continued. "Breakfast at dawn, dinner at sundown. Lunch is flexible depending on the day's work. Charlotte's lessons should be in the morning when her mind's fresh. Afternoons, I'd appreciate help with household tasks." But nothing heavy. I don't want you injuring your hands." Lucy bristled slightly. "I told you I can do anything." "I know," Nathaniel interrupted gently, "but there's no shame in working smart instead of working hard. Let me and the ranch hands handle anything that might cause you pain or further damage. There's plenty of other work that needs doing." It was the matter-of-fact respect in his voice that made Lucy relax. He wasn't coddling her or treating her as broken. He was simply being practical, the way any good employer would be. The first few days passed in a blur of adjustment and discovery. Lucy learned that Charlotte was frighteningly intelligent, reading at a level far beyond her years, and hungry for knowledge about everything from mathematics to astronomy. She learned that Nathaniel kept his late wife's medical texts on a shelf in the parlor, and sometimes read them late into the night, as if by studying the disease that killed her, he could somehow understand her death better. She learned that the two ranch hands, old Jesse Carter and young Miguel Rodriguez, treated Nathaniel with genuine respect, not the false deference that characterized so many interactions between black employers and white employees. And she learned that Nathaniel ran his ranch with a combination of fairness, efficiency, and quiet innovation that had made him one of the more successful ranchers in the territory. But most importantly, she learned about Charlotte. The little girl followed Lucy everywhere those first days, chattering constantly, asking endless questions, and displaying a complete lack of awareness, or perhaps indifference, to Lucy's scarred hands. "Does it hurt?" Charlotte asked on the third day, watching Lucy knead bread dough with practiced efficiency. "Not anymore," Lucy answered honestly. "Sometimes they're stiff in cold weather, and I can't feel temperature properly. I have to be careful with hot pans, but mostly they're just different." "Different isn't bad," Charlotte said with the absolute certainty of a child who'd learned this lesson well. "Papa says being different is what makes people interesting. He says if everybody was the same, the world would be boring as dirt." Lucy laughed, a sound that surprised her. She couldn't remember the last time she'd laughed. "Your papa is a wise man." "Yep," Charlotte beamed with pride. "Smartest man in the whole territory. Well, except maybe Mr. Obadiah at the telegraph office. Papa says Mr. Obadiah knows things because the telegraph brings news from all over the world, and that's better than being smart from books." As the days turned into weeks, Lucy felt something she'd thought lost forever: belonging. The Double Creek Ranch wasn't just a place of employment, it was becoming a home. She taught Charlotte mathematics using dried beans and buttons, geography using flower maps on the kitchen table, and literature by reading aloud from the small collection of books Nathaniel's late wife had treasured. In return, Charlotte taught Lucy how to laugh again, how to see possibility instead of limitation, how to exist in the present moment without the crushing weight of 3 years' accumulated shame. And Nathaniel. Nathaniel was a revelation. He was nothing like the men Lucy had known in Silver Point. He didn't raise his voice in anger. He didn't drink to excess. He didn't treat women as property or servants. He listened when people spoke. He admitted when he was wrong. He thanked Lucy for her work, not just with wages, but with genuine appreciation. One evening, nearly a month after Lucy's arrival, she and Nathaniel sat on the front porch while Charlotte played in the yard, chasing fireflies in the gathering dusk. "She's happier," Nathaniel said quietly. "Charlotte, I mean. I haven't seen her this joyful since her mother died." "She's a wonderful child," Lucy replied. "Smart, kind, curious. You've done an excellent job raising her alone." "I've done what I could, but there are things a father can't teach. Things she needs to learn from a woman." He paused, then added carefully, "Things she needs to learn from someone who's had to be strong in the face of cruelty." Lucy understood what he wasn't saying. Charlotte would face discrimination as she grew older. She was the daughter of a black rancher in a territory where such success invited both admiration and resentment. She would need to know how to carry herself with dignity, how to deflect cruelty, how to build a life despite the barriers erected by others. "I'll teach her everything I can," Lucy promised. "I know you will," Nathaniel said. "You already are, just by being yourself." They sat in comfortable silence, watching Charlotte's small figure darting between light and shadow. The evening was peaceful, the air cool and fresh with the promise of autumn. For the first time in 3 years, Lucy felt something close to contentment. She should have known it wouldn't last. Early September 1880, news of Lucy's employment at the Double Creek Ranch had spread through Silver Point like a grass fire, generating equal parts gossip and outrage. The cursed girl living with the black rancher. The scandal was too delicious to ignore, but frontier communities, for all their prejudices, were also pragmatic. When the annual summer gathering was announced, a day-long celebration featuring competitions, trading and socializing, it was understood that everyone would attend, even outcasts, even black ranchers, because the gathering was also the primary opportunity for ranchers to negotiate livestock sales, for merchants to move inventory, and for the entire community to come together in a rare display of territorial unity. Nathaniel hadn't planned to attend. He rarely subjected himself to the social dynamics of Silver Point when he could avoid it. But Charlotte had begged, and Lucy had quietly mentioned that the gathering included a pie competition that she'd like to enter if he didn't object. "You want to enter a pie competition?" Nathaniel repeated slowly, studying Lucy's face for signs of jest. "In a town that spent 3 years treating you like a pariah." "Yes," Lucy said simply, "because I make excellent pies. And I refuse to let their ignorance take that away from me." Nathaniel had laughed then, a deep, genuine sound that made Lucy's heart do something unexpected in her chest. "All right then, we'll go, all 3 of us, and we'll hold our heads high while we do it." The summer gathering was held in the large meadow just east of town, where temporary booths and tents had been erected in organized chaos. By the time Nathaniel's wagon rolled into view, the event was in full swing. Children racing between displays, men examining livestock, women comparing preserves and handicrafts. Lucy climbed down from the wagon carrying her pie, an intricate lattice-topped creation that had taken her most of the morning to perfect, while Charlotte bounced with excitement, already spotting other children her age. "Can I go play, Papa? Please, please, please." Nathaniel glanced at Lucy, who nodded. "Go on," he told Charlotte, "but stay where I can see you and don't go near the horses without me." Charlotte took off like a shot, her braids flying behind her. "Brave girl," Lucy murmured, watching Charlotte approach a group of children who immediately stopped playing to stare at her. But Charlotte, with the oblivious confidence of a well-loved child, simply smiled and asked if she could join their game. "She doesn't know yet," Nathaniel said quietly, "that they'll make her different, that they'll use her father's skin color and her mother's death as weapons against her." "Then let her have this day of innocence," Lucy replied. "She'll learn about cruelty soon enough. All children do." They made their way to the pie competition booth, where Mrs. Blackwood, the banker's wife who'd been part of the mob that had tormented Lucy weeks earlier, was serving as head judge. Her expression when she saw Lucy approach was a masterpiece of conflicting emotions. Disgust, surprise, and something that might have been grudging respect for Lucy's audacity. "Entry fee is 50 cents, Mrs. Blackwood said coldly, "and all pies must be prepared without assistance." Lucy carefully placed her pie on the display table and paid the fee. "I prepared it entirely myself, no assistance." "With those hands?" The question came from Martha Perkins, another of the judges, her tone making it clear what she thought of Lucy's capabilities. "With these hands," Lucy confirmed evenly. "Same hands that cook every meal at the Double Creek Ranch, same hands that made the dress Charlotte Cross is wearing today, same hands that lifted burning timber trying to save my mother's life. These hands work just fine, Mrs. Perkins. They work hard, they work honestly, and they work well." The directness of Lucy's response created a ripple of discomfort among the gathered women. Nathaniel, standing several feet behind Lucy, felt a surge of pride. This was not the broken girl he'd rescued from a mob 6 weeks ago. This was a young woman reclaiming her dignity one brave moment at a time. The judging proceeded. Lucy's pie, a perfectly balanced apple creation with a flaky crust and just the right amount of spice, was sampled, evaluated, and rated, along with 20 other entries. While the judges deliberated, Nathaniel and Lucy wandered through the gathering, with Nathaniel negotiating the sale of 3 head of cattle to a buyer from Denver, while Lucy examined the craft displays with interest. They were watching a roping competition when Charlotte's scream split the air. Nathaniel was moving before his conscious mind fully processed the sound, running toward the cluster of children near the edge of the meadow, with Lucy sprinting behind him. They found Charlotte in the dirt, blood streaming from a gash on her forehead, while Bobby Fletcher, the same boy who'd taunted Lucy weeks earlier, stood over her with a rock in his hand. "She pushed me first," Bobby was saying defensively to the gathering crowd of adults. "I didn't mean to..." But Nathaniel wasn't listening. He dropped to his knees beside Charlotte, his hands shaking as he examined the wound. Head injuries were dangerous. People died from head injuries. His vision grayed at the edges as memory slammed into him, his wife burning with fever, slipping away despite everything he did to save her. "Charlotte, baby, can you hear me?" His voice cracked with fear. Charlotte was conscious but dazed, her eyes unfocused. The bleeding was substantial, painting one side of her face crimson. "Move," Lucy commanded, shouldering past frozen onlookers. She dropped beside Nathaniel, her scarred hands already reaching for Charlotte. "Nathaniel, I need you to stay calm. She's going to be fine, but I need you to stay calm. The blood... Head wounds bleed heavily. It looks worse than it is." Lucy was already pulling a clean cloth from her pocket. She always carried extras, a habit from years of kitchen work, and pressing it firmly against Charlotte's forehead. "Charlotte, sweetheart, can you look at me?" Charlotte's eyes found Lucy's face and focused. "Lucy, my head hurts." "I know, baby. I know. But you're going to be just fine. I need you to stay very still for me while I take care of this, okay?" Lucy's hands moved with practiced efficiency, checking Charlotte's pupils for signs of concussion, testing her responses, evaluating the depth of the wound. Years of helping her mother tend to minor injuries in their household had given Lucy basic medical knowledge that now proved invaluable. "It needs stitching," Lucy said quietly to Nathaniel. "But it's clean, not too deep. Doc Morrison should do it properly, but I can close it temporarily if we can't get her to town quickly." "You can do that." Nathaniel's voice was hoarse with fear and hope. "I can do that," Lucy confirmed. "But my hands, I need help with the threading. My hands don't have the fine motor control for threading a needle anymore." "I'll do it," said a voice from the crowd. Jessie Carter, Nathaniel's older ranch hand, pushed forward. "Tell me what you need, Miss Lucy." What followed was a demonstration of skill, courage, and trust that would be talked about in Silver Point for years to come. Lucy worked methodically, her scarred hands steady despite their limited dexterity, with Jessie threading needles and Nathaniel holding Charlotte still. The little girl was brave, crying quietly but not screaming, trusting the adults around her to make things right. The crowd watched in absolute silence as Lucy Mercer, the cursed girl with the devil's hands, saved Nathaniel Cross's daughter with a combination of medical knowledge, improvised tools, and determination. When the last stitch was tied off and the wound properly bandaged, Lucy sat back on her heels, breathing hard. Charlotte was pale but stable, already reaching for her father with small, trembling hands. Nathaniel pulled his daughter into his arms, tears streaming down his face. "Thank you," he whispered to Lucy. "Thank you." But Lucy wasn't listening to Nathaniel. She was staring at Bobby Fletcher, who stood frozen at the edge of the crowd, his earlier bravado completely vanished. "It was an accident," Bobby's father was saying loudly to anyone who would listen. "Boys will be boys, no harm intended. No harm." Lucy stood slowly, her blood-stained dress and trembling hands making her look like an avenging angel. "Your son threw a rock at a 7-year-old girl's head. That's not an accident, that's assault. Now see here." "No, you see here," Lucy's voice carried across the suddenly silent gathering. "For 3 years, I have endured your mockery, your cruelty, your baseless superstitions about my hands being cursed. And I stayed silent because I believed somewhere in my broken heart that maybe you were right. Maybe I was cursed. Maybe I deserved your hatred." She held up her scarred hands for everyone to see. "These hands pulled burning timber off my dying mother. These hands work every day to earn my living honestly. These hands just saved Charlotte Cross's life. Tell me, what exactly is cursed about that?" The gathering was utterly silent. Even the children had stopped their games to watch. "My hands are different," Lucy continued, her voice steadier now. "They're scarred. They're not beautiful, but they work, they help, they heal. And that's more than I can say for the hands that threw that rock, or the hands that have spent 3 years pointing and laughing at a grieving girl who lost her mother in the most traumatic way imaginable." She turned to face the crowd fully. "You call my hands cursed? Then explain to me how these cursed hands just saved a child's life while all of you stood around doing nothing but watching. We're witnessing something powerful here, aren't we? Lucy's transformation from victim to defender." But this story is about to take an even more dramatic turn. Before we continue, I need to ask you to do something crucial. If you're not already subscribed to The Black Rancher, hit that button right now. And here's why this matters. Stories like Lucy's, stories about ordinary people finding extraordinary courage, are exactly what we need to remember about our shared history. The American frontier wasn't just gunslingers and gold rushes. It was people like Nathaniel Cross and Lucy Mercer, fighting for dignity in a world determined to deny it to them. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that courage comes in all forms, and that the most powerful transformations often happen when we refuse to accept the limitations others place on us. Now let's see what happens when Nathaniel Cross finally speaks. The words hung in the air like the last notes of a church bell, resonant, undeniable, challenging anyone to disagree. Nathaniel stood slowly, Charlotte still cradled in his arms. He looked around at the gathered crowd, people he'd lived near for years, traded with, occasionally helped, but never truly belonged among. "I want to say something," Nathaniel announced, his deep voice carrying easily across the meadow. "And I want all of you to hear it." Martin Fletcher stepped forward, clearly preparing to object. But Sheriff Hargrove, a practical man who valued order above all else, held up a hand to stop him. "Let the man speak. His daughter was just injured. He's earned the right to be heard." Nathaniel adjusted Charlotte in his arms so she could rest her head on his shoulder, then faced the crowd with the quiet dignity that characterized everything he did. "When I came to this territory 8 years ago, I had nothing but the money I'd saved working cattle drives from Texas to Montana. I bought my land fair and square. I've paid my taxes on time every year. I've helped neighbors when they needed it, regardless of whether they'd help me in return. I've lived by the law, worked hard, and raised my daughter to be honest and kind." He paused, letting the words settle. "But I've always known that to most of you, none of that matters as much as the color of my skin. I'm the Black Rancher, not Nathaniel Cross, successful cattleman. Not Nathaniel Cross, widowed father doing his best to raise his daughter right. Just the Black Rancher, as if that's the only thing about me worth noting." Several people in the crowd had the decency to look uncomfortable. "I've made peace with that," Nathaniel continued. "Or at least I thought I had. But then 6 weeks ago, I rode into town and saw a young woman being tormented by a mob. Not a mob of outlaws or drunkards, but a mob of respectable citizens, people who go to church on Sunday and claim to follow Christ's teachings about loving your neighbor." He looked directly at Martin Fletcher. "People who preach morality while practicing cruelty." "Now hold on," Martin started, but Nathaniel talked right over him. "That young woman was Lucy Mercer, and her crime, having scarred hands from trying to save her mother's life. That's what you punished her for. That's what you've been punishing her for 3 years, for loving her mother enough to risk herself trying to save her." Nathaniel shifted Charlotte slightly, and several women in the crowd gasped at the blood still visible on the makeshift bandage. The sight of an injured child had a way of cutting through ideological barriers. "I brought Lucy to my ranch because I needed help with Charlotte, yes, but also because I couldn't stand by and watch what this town was doing to her. And in the 6 weeks she's been with us, she's become part of our family. She's taught Charlotte more than I ever could. She's brought warmth back into a house that's been too empty and too cold for too long. She's worked harder than anyone I've ever employed and never once complained or asked for special consideration." He took a breath, and when he continued, his voice was thick with emotion. "And today, when my daughter was injured, when I froze in panic and fear, Lucy Mercer stepped forward. She assessed the situation. She stopped the bleeding. She stitched the wound with hands that you call cursed, but which I now call blessed. Those hands, those supposedly cursed, ruined hands, just saved my daughter's life." Nathaniel's eyes swept across the crowd, making contact with as many people as possible. "So I want to make something very clear to all of you. Lucy Mercer is under my protection now. She's part of my household, and anyone who disrespects her, disrespects me. Anyone who mocks her, anyone who treats her as less than fully human, will answer to me personally. And I promise you, I take slights against my family very seriously." The threat was subtle, but unmistakable. Nathaniel Cross was not a violent man, but he was also not someone to be trifled with. His reputation as a skilled horseman and marksman was well established, as was his network of connections throughout the territory. "But more than that," Nathaniel continued, his voice softening slightly, "I want you to think about what you saw here today. Lucy could have stayed back. She could have let someone else handle Charlotte's injury. She could have protected herself from your judgment by remaining invisible." He looked down at Lucy, who stood beside him with tears streaming down her face. But she didn't. She stepped forward. She used her knowledge, her courage, and yes, her scarred hands, to help a child in need. That's not the action of someone cursed. That's the action of someone blessed with compassion, skill, and more moral courage than most people will ever possess. Nathaniel's gaze found Mrs. Blackwood in the crowd. "You judge pies here today, Sarah. You decide which is best based on taste, appearance, craftsmanship. Well, I'm asking you and everyone else here to judge Lucy Mercer by the same standards, not by the scars she carries, but by the substance of her character, by her actions, by her heart." He adjusted Charlotte one more time, preparing to leave. "My daughter needs proper medical attention from Doc Morrison, but before I go, I'll say one more thing. This town has a choice to make. You can continue down the path of cruelty and prejudice, mocking those who are different and congratulating yourselves for your moral superiority. Or you can start living by the principles you claim to hold dear, principles of charity, kindness, and judging people by the content of their character." Nathaniel turned to walk toward his wagon, Lucy falling into step beside him. But before they'd taken 3 steps, a voice called out, "Wait!" It was Mrs. Blackwood. She stepped forward from the judges' area, holding a blue ribbon, the symbol of first place in the pie competition. "The judges have conferred," she announced, her voice carrying across the now silent gathering, "and we have a winner in the pie competition." She walked toward Lucy with measured steps, her expression complex and unreadable. When she reached Lucy, she stopped and looked down at the blue ribbon in her hands. "Miss Mercer," Mrs. Blackwood said formally, "your apple pie has won first place. The crust was exceptional, the filling perfectly spiced, and the presentation was beyond reproach. You are a skilled baker, and this victory is well earned." She extended the ribbon to Lucy with trembling hands, hands that, like everyone else's, had remained uselessly at their sides while Lucy had saved Charlotte. Lucy stared at the ribbon for a long moment before taking it with her scarred fingers. "Thank you, Mrs. Blackwood." Sarah Blackwood nodded stiffly, then did something no one expected. She looked around at the gathered crowd and said loudly, "I owe Miss Mercer an apology. We all do. What I witnessed today is what she did for Charlotte Cross. I was wrong. We were all wrong." The admission was small, a crack in a dam rather than the dam breaking, but it was something. Other voices began to murmur in agreement. Not everyone, and not with enthusiasm, but enough to suggest that perhaps Nathaniel's words had found purchase in at least some hearts. Doc Morrison pushed through the crowd, his medical bag in hand. "Let me see that girl," he said gruffly to Nathaniel. "And you," he added to Lucy. "Fine work with those emergency stitches. Clean even, properly spaced. Where'd you learn field medicine?" "My mother," Lucy said quietly. "She was a midwife before the fire." Doc Morrison examined Charlotte quickly, then nodded approval. "The girl will be fine. Scar probably, but a small one. I'll take her to my office and do the final dressing, but the emergency work was excellent. You saved her from serious complications, young lady. Possibly saved her life." He looked around at the crowd. "I'll be putting that in my official report to the Territorial Medical Board. The record should show that Lucy Mercer provided life-saving medical assistance today. That's the kind of thing that goes in the history books. As Doc Morrison loaded Charlotte into his buggy, with Nathaniel riding alongside, Lucy stood alone in the meadow, holding her blue ribbon and watching the crowd disperse. Many people avoided her eyes, but a few, including surprisingly some of the women who'd been most cruel to her in the past, offered small nods of acknowledgement as they passed. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't even acceptance, really. But it was recognition. And after 3 years of being invisible except as an object of mockery, recognition felt like a miracle. Jessie Carter appeared at her elbow. "Come on, Miss Lucy. I'll drive you back to the ranch." "Mr. Nathaniel will want you there when he brings Charlotte home." Lucy climbed into the wagon, still clutching her blue ribbon. As they rode away from the summer gathering, she looked back at Silver Point one more time. The town hadn't changed. Not really. But perhaps she had. And perhaps, just perhaps, that was enough. 3 weeks later, the wound on Charlotte's forehead healed remarkably well, leaving only a thin white scar at her hairline, a mark she wore with pride, telling anyone who asked that Lucy saved my life with her magic hands. Lucy would correct her gently each time. "Not magic, Charlotte, just trained hands." But Charlotte remained unconvinced. To a 7-year-old, the difference between skill and magic was negligible anyway. Life at the Double Creek Ranch settled into a new rhythm. Lucy's work expanded beyond just caring for Charlotte to helping Nathaniel with ranch bookkeeping and corresponding with buyers throughout the territory. Her education, though interrupted by her mother's death, had been comprehensive, and she wrote in a clear, elegant hand that impressed the merchants and cattlemen Nathaniel did business with. But the more significant change was in Silver Point itself. Word of what had happened at the summer gathering spread fast, and the story grew in the telling. As stories always do, Lucy Mercer, the cursed girl with burned hands, had saved a child's life while trained medical professionals stood by doing nothing. The black rancher had defended her honor and shamed the town into recognizing her humanity. It was the kind of story that made people uncomfortable and forced them to reevaluate long-held assumptions. And while not everyone was willing to change their opinions, Martin Fletcher predictably doubled down on his prejudices. Enough people experienced genuine shifts in perspective that Lucy's daily life improved dramatically. Mrs. Miller, her former employer, sent a stiff note apologizing for any past misunderstandings and offering Lucy her old position back at higher wages. Lucy declined politely, but kept the letter as evidence of how far things had come. The general store, which had previously forgotten items Lucy had ordered or claimed they were out of stock of basic supplies, suddenly became remarkably efficient in serving her. And perhaps most surprisingly, 3 different families approached Nathaniel, asking if Lucy might be willing to provide basic medical training to their daughters. The territorial doctor was often days away, and having someone in the community with field medicine skills was recognized as genuinely valuable. Lucy agreed, and soon found herself teaching a small class of young women the basics of wound care, fever management, and emergency childbirth assistance. The same skills her mother had once taught her. One evening in late September, Nathaniel and Lucy sat on the ranch porch after Charlotte had gone to bed. The air had turned crisp with the promise of autumn, and the stars overhead seemed close enough to touch. "You've changed this place," Nathaniel said quietly. "Not just the ranch, the whole territory. People are talking about you differently now." Lucy smiled slightly. "They're talking about us, Nathaniel. You're the one who stood up in front of the whole town and demanded they see me differently. I just said what needed saying. You're the one who proved it by saving Charlotte." They sat in comfortable silence for a while before Nathaniel spoke again. "I've been thinking about something Charlotte said the other day. She asked me if you were going to be her new mama." Lucy's breath caught. "What did you tell her?" "I told her that was a complicated question with a complicated answer. That you're her friend and teacher and caregiver, and that's enough for now." He paused. "But then she asked me if I wanted you to be more than that, and I realized I didn't have a good answer for her." Lucy's heart was pounding now, but she forced herself to remain calm. "Do you have an answer, I mean?" Nathaniel turned to face her fully. Lucy Mercer, I'm a freedman rancher in a territory that barely tolerates my existence. I'm a widower, raising a daughter alone in a world that's often cruel to children who are different. I'm not wealthy, I'm not powerful, and I'm not even particularly young anymore. I have nothing to offer you except hard work, honest dealing, and a life that will never be easy. He reached out and took one of her scarred hands in both of his. But if you were willing, if you could see past all the practical objections to imagine a future together, I would count myself the most blessed man in the territory, because you are everything I never knew I needed. You're strong where I'm weak, brave when I'm afraid, and you love my daughter like she's your own. Lucy felt tears streaming down her face, but for once they were tears of joy rather than pain. These hands, she said, looking down at their joined fingers, his dark and weathered, hers pale and scarred. Everyone told me they were cursed, that they were ruined, that I would never be able to live a normal life or be valued by anyone. She looked up at Nathaniel, her hazel eyes meeting his dark brown ones. But you looked at these hands and saw capability, saw strength, saw worth. You gave me back my dignity when I'd forgotten what it felt like. How could I not love you for that? The words hung between them, an admission neither had quite dared to make until now. Is that a yes? Nathaniel asked, hope and vulnerability mixing in his expression. That's a yes, Lucy confirmed. To a future together, to building something real from our shared brokenness, to proving that cursed hands and a scorned man can create something beautiful anyway. Nathaniel pulled her close, and they sat together on the porch, two outcasts who had found in each other something the world had tried to deny them: acceptance, partnership, and the possibility of love. Inside the house, Charlotte pressed her face against the window, watching them with satisfaction. She'd known it would work out. After all, Lucy had magic hands. Magic hands could do anything. 5 years later, 1885. The story of Lucy Mercer and Nathaniel Cross became one of those frontier legends that parents told their children, sometimes as a cautionary tale about the dangers of prejudice, sometimes as an inspirational story about courage overcoming adversity. Lucy and Nathaniel married quietly in the spring of 1881, with only Jessie, Miguel, Doc Morrison, and a few other close friends in attendance. The town of Silver Point reacted with its typical mix of scandal and grudging acceptance, but by that point, neither Lucy nor Nathaniel cared much about the town's opinion. Charlotte gained 2 younger siblings, a brother born in 1882 and a sister in 1884, and grew up to become a teacher herself, never forgetting the lessons she'd learned about seeing beyond surface differences to recognize true worth. Lucy's hands never fully healed. The scar tissue remained, the limited dexterity persisted, but she became known throughout the territory as someone with genuine medical skill. She assisted Doc Morrison with difficult cases, trained other young women in emergency medicine, and saved dozens of lives over the years with the same hands the town had once called cursed. The Double Creek Ranch prospered under Nathaniel and Lucy's joint management. They expanded their holdings, built a reputation for fair dealing and quality livestock, and became one of the more successful ranching operations in the territory. But perhaps the most lasting impact of their story was something more intangible. The way Nathaniel had stood up for Lucy, the way Lucy had demonstrated her worth through action rather than words, the way the community had been forced to confront its own prejudices, these things changed Silver Point in subtle but permanent ways. It didn't eliminate racism or discrimination. Progress is rarely that simple, but it created cracks in the wall of certainty that allowed people to believe prejudice was justified, and through those cracks, light began to seep in. Years later, when Charlotte Cross was teaching school in Denver, one of her students asked about the thin scar on her forehead. Charlotte told the story, how she'd been injured as a child, how Lucy Mercer had saved her life, how her father had defended Lucy's honor before the entire town. Were Miss Lucy's hands really cursed? The student asked. Charlotte smiled, thinking of the woman who'd become her second mother, who'd taught her to read and think and see the world with compassion. No, Charlotte said firmly, her hands weren't cursed, they were blessed. The town just couldn't see it until my father made them look properly. And in that answer, in the confidence with which Charlotte rejected the old prejudice, the true legacy of that day at the summer gathering lived on. The hands that everyone called cursed had healed more than just Charlotte's wound. They had begun healing the community's blind cruelty, one brave action at a time. What a journey we've taken together. From mockery and cruelty to redemption and love, Lucy Mercer's story reminds us that the hands others call cursed might be the very hands that save lives and change communities. If this story moved you, if Lucy's courage and Nathaniel's steadfast defense of dignity resonated with you, then I need you to take action right now. First, hit that subscribe button for The Black Rancher and ring that notification bell. We're committed to bringing you these powerful forgotten stories from America's frontier. Stories of courage, resilience, and the everyday heroes who changed their communities one brave act at a time. Second, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, someone who's been made to feel less than because of how they look, someone who's been judged unfairly, someone who needs a reminder that the world's cruelest assessments are often wrong. Third, leave a comment below telling us what moment in Lucy's story impacted you most. Was it when Nathaniel first defended her in town? When she saved Charlotte's life? When the community finally recognized her worth? Your engagement helps us understand what stories matter most to you. The American West wasn't built only by the famous figures in our history books. It was built by people like Lucy Mercer and Nathaniel Cross, people who fought for dignity in a world that tried to deny it, who loved across boundaries that society erected, who proved that courage comes in all colors and from the most unexpected places. These are the stories that deserve to be remembered. These are the legacies we need to preserve. And with your support, we'll keep bringing them to life, one powerful narrative at a time. Thank you for riding with us today. Thank you for caring about these forgotten chapters of our shared history. And thank you for believing that everyone, regardless of their scars, their skin color, or their circumstances, deserves dignity, respect, and the chance to prove their worth. Until our trails cross again, remember, the hands others call cursed might be the very hands that save your life. This is The Black Rancher, preserving the stories history tried to forget.